tariffs create a wall to protect a sick patient. In this case, the sick patient is the American car industry. Now, it's very effective if you rebuild your industry and make it competitive for a short time behind those walls. But in reality, what happens with tariffs is that you don't face global competition. So you don't see how quickly your competition is moving, improving, and innovating, and therefore you become fat and lazy. The result is that when the tariff barriers go down, your competition is so far ahead of you in innovation that basically you're not competitive. That is what will happen in the US behind those tariffs.
The White House has insisted that there are benefits already being shown because of these tariffs. It says that Nissan has announced it's going to maintain 2 shifts at a production facility in Tennessee. It says that General Motors has announced it's going to boost truck production in Indiana. I mean, they've even talked about private investment in the first 11 weeks of Trump's administration was more of that than of the whole Biden administration. Is any of this true? And does any of this kind of stave off everything else that's going on?
Well, I don't know about Nissan's particular plans, but essentially, I think the Trump administration is hoping. I mean, their whole plan with this is to reverse engineer globalization, try to get companies to go back to America, those that don't pay a tariff. So they either make more revenue from tariffs, or they reshore manufacturing that got hollowed out during the last few decades during globalization. For them, they're doing this in part for their supporters. Trump gets a lot of support from his working class voters in places like Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that were hard hit by car companies and others moving abroad. What they haven't really said is that this is not going to be great for consumers. So obviously, you know, when a car plant went to Mexico the first time, Andy will know this better than anybody, that created lower prices for consumers. So they benefited, but some of the workers that lost their jobs didn't. So in trying to reverse engineer that, you may get some inward bound foreign direct investment that otherwise wouldn't have been there. But that comes at a cost for the economy that they're not really talking about yet. And I think that's what you're seeing reflected in some of the financial markets. I mean, these financial markets dropped $6.6 trillion in value this week. To put that in perspective, that is $20,000 for every American man, woman, and child, or about $80,000 for a family of 4. So that's a pretty big hit to people's savings and 401k investments.
And do you get the sense that is being discussed in the US and that even Donald Trump supporters are concerned by that? Or are they believing what Donald Trump keeps saying, that this has been a success?
Well, we'll see. I mean, they might see slightly lower gas prices, so some of them might be happy about that. But if the price of their Ford F-150 pickup truck starts to go up pretty sharply, they might have second thoughts about this. You know, globalization has worked in many ways. It's lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty around the world, given American consumers choice they've never had before. You know, I personally grew up in a closed economy. I grew up in Mexico in the 1970s. That had tariffs, high tariffs. And it wasn't so great as a consumer. You'd go to the supermarket and there weren't many products because most of those were made in Mexico by companies that didn't face international competition. So those products weren't very good. So it may take a long time for that to play out. We'll see whether his supporters like this or not in the end. I think right now they're sticking with him for sure. They're sort of all in. So I think politically, you know, Trump cares what happens with the stock market. He's always said the stock market is important as a way to measure what's happening. So he will care. I think right now they're taking the attitude that they're willing to take some short-term pain to unwind this as part of their long-term vision. But we'll see if that gets out of control. That may be harder to maintain. David,
stay with us because I want to bring Andy Palmer, who's former CEO of Aston Martin and former COO of Nissan. Give us your reflections on, well, what's happened in the last few days, whether that be from the Trump tariffs going into the counter tariffs from China and everything in between.
So 3 negatives and a positive, I guess. First of all, tariffs, blunt instruments, which makes vehicles more expensive to the consumer. Let's be in no doubt about this. The person that pays for the tariff ultimately is the consumer. Car companies make about 6 to 8% EBIT profit, and obviously can't absorb 25%. So that's either and going to result in decontenting of cars and increased pricing, so poorer value for money. Secondly, of course, cars are elastic in pricing, so meaning that if you put the price up, the volume comes down. In the volume coming down, that hits the manufacturers, and that hits very, very quickly. And that means that you'll see redundancies in car plants around the world almost immediately. Now, that's going to hit in particular companies that don't have the opportunity to even think about manufacturing overseas. And that's going to be the likes of Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Aston Martin, McLaren, Lotus. These are car companies that simply don't have enough volume to contemplate anything other than manufacturing in the UK. It might be that Jaguar Land Rover and Mini could contemplate, but that means hundreds of millions of pounds of investment and at least a 2-year time frame.
So people can't quickly respond to that by building plants in the US. What about the argument that car makers like Aston Martin, they're high end, and if you're going to buy an Aston Martin, you can probably afford to suck up some of that 25%. It might not stop you buying an Aston Martin, but if it was a Nissan, maybe it would, because that's not such a high value car.
I'm afraid from my experience, it's a myth.
Right.
Basically, those luxury cars, they're desirable for sure, but if you could put the price higher, you would have already put the price higher. And particularly wealthy customers are extremely sensitive that they're not ripped off. They'll pay a fair price, they'll pay a market price, they'll pay for nice things, but they won't overpay. And particularly in the US, there is a great deal of sensitivity around pricing. Much harder for companies like Aston Martin than, let's say, Rolls-Royce, but nevertheless, that price elasticity definitely exists.
So if you were still CEO of Aston Martin now, what would you be doing? Would you be laying people off now?
I think it will hit very quickly. There are stocks of cars in the United States that will be at the old pricing, that will keep them going for a little bit, but that doesn't help the coffers of Aston or Bentley or Rolls because they've already been wholesaled. What you will see is advanced orders basically drying up quite quickly, and normally you'll have to adjust your shift patterns to accommodate that. So yes, it's quite likely that you'll see redundancies quite quickly. That's not just Aston Martin, that's across the path, the whole piece.
And I guess an additional problem which has been mentioned is the danger that cheap Chinese EVs are going to flood the UK market because of the tariffs imposed on China. They're not going to sell them into the US market. That's also going to be presumably problematic for UK car manufacturers.
It is. Then the change of the world order has so many complications for it. But let's get to the Chinese. Tariffs create a wall to protect a sick patient. In this case, the sick patient is the American car industry. Now, it's very effective if you rebuild your industry and make it competitive for a short time behind those walls. But in reality, what happens with tariffs is that you don't face global competition. So you don't see how quickly your competition is moving, improving and innovating, and therefore you become fat and lazy. The result is that when the tariff barriers go down, your competition is so far ahead of you in innovation that basically you're not competitive. That is what will happen in the US behind those tariffs. And the Chinese will move very, very quickly to continue to innovate, particularly in a moment where we're changing so much in the car space with the advent of electric vehicles and AI technology in electric vehicles. So there is an order change there.
So I just want to ask you one more question, Andy, before I bring David back in. So you're clearly saying counter tariffs are not the answer. So what is the answer now? Do you just have to ride it out as car manufacturers until there's a change in policy, whether that's a change in the White House or Trump changing his mind?
Basically, cool heads. I think this is the expression being used. Is a good idea. Think about what you can do with the tariff. The best thing that could happen is that Keir Starmer could negotiate them away. I did say there is one positive. The one positive is that the tariffs that we've received in the United Kingdom are significantly lower than elsewhere. And I've already have evidence of requests for manufacturing in the UK, supplementing manufacturing elsewhere in the world, recognizing that our tariffs are lower. Now, if you can make them lower down to zero, if we can have a political engagement which will take those tariffs away in some way, it is actually an opportunity for the UK to regain its manufacturing capability, and just be more competitive than, say, the EU or China or Japan, who have got massive tariffs.
Yeah.
So there is an opportunity here that we should not ignore.
David, I want to bring you back in, Wall Street Journal London bureau chief. We were speaking a little bit earlier on to a journalist in the US who was talking about there is starting to be some pressure put on Donald Trump. Of course, the midterms aren't that far away. Republican senators are starting to get slightly twitchy about the idea of things like, well, we heard earlier, coffee, shampoo, day-to-day items that are already starting to go up in price. You can be ideological if you're Donald Trump or if you're one of the people around him who aren't going to be up for election shortly. If you're a Republican senator facing the midterms, that's more worrying. Do you think there's going to be any compromise, any change in direction from Donald Trump in light of those circumstances?
Well, I think right now he feels he holds all the cards and he has time to wait. I think things will have to get pretty bad for that to change. We'll see what happens when the EU and other countries begin announcing some of these counter tariffs. They're designed with politics in mind. During Trump's first term, what we saw is that the EU and countries like Mexico and Canada were very clever about the kinds of products they targeted for retaliatory tariffs. So they would target in red states Republican senators and congressmen who say we're from a district that exported a lot of Kentucky bourbon or blue jeans or other products, and really went after those John Deere tractors, Harley Davidson motorcycles, and that causes localized pain for these congressmen and senators. That then they go to the White House and say, "Hey, this isn't working out so great for my constituents. Let's do something about this." So that kind of localized pain may increase the political pressure, as will rising prices. I mean, one of the reasons Trump won was because inflation was quite high. The Biden administration had really borrowed and spent a lot of money, which drove prices higher, and people were tired of that. So, this isn't going to make that any better.
Yeah.
So certainly political pressure is the one thing that might cause him to change direction or pivot a little bit.
Thank you both for your analysis this morning. I'm grateful to both of you. You heard there from David Luno, who's the Wall Street Journal London bureau chief, and Andy Palmer, former CEO of Aston Martin and former COO of Nissan. And I think that's the really crucial point that David puts at the end there. We were discussing it a little bit earlier on. So many people who voted for Donald Trump said inflation was high under Biden. I was better off when Donald Trump was in office first time around. Because of that, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. If prices start to go up, that is going to be a bit of a headache. And we've been talking about, we talk about these trillions of dollars that have been wiped off the stock markets. And it's very difficult to comprehend. That certainly is for me. $6.6 trillion. I was struck by the fact that David said that equates to $20,000 for every man, woman and child in the US.